let's read about a few more things. Let's say we look at the bee eater. We said adapt, relocate, or die. These are the options species face, and they cannot order on Amazon and get food. So they have to just find food, and they can adapt as long as there is some food to find. They can relocate if there are conditions that are favorable to them, or there aren't any predators that will eat them up, or they end up dying, right? So let's look at the bee eater over here. Bee eater is exactly what it is. It eats bees, right? People in Amsterdam and Brussels are used to lovely though dull looking birds like sparrows and pigeons. Everywhere there are pigeons, but now there is something new. It has a bright green blue belly, an orange brown back and a head, a yellow chin, orange brown back and head, yellow chin and cheeks, and a cool black mask from the beak to over its eyes. Here it is, all those beautiful colors, and definitely much more interesting looking than a sparrow or a pigeon. May I introduce you to the bee eater. I'll give you 3 guesses what it eats. It catches the bees in the air and bashes them against a branch to remove the sting, which is poisonous. Yum! Tasty. The bee eater also enjoys grasshoppers and dragonflies. So each bird is eating something, and dragonflies eat the larvae of some fish over the water, and grasshoppers eat whatever they eat. Among other birds such as the sparrows and blackbirds, the bee eater looks very bright and exciting. Even on bird safari in South Africa, you'd still point out the bee eater. But now, thanks to climate change, some people are getting a chance to see it much closer to home. Bee eaters spend winter in northern Africa. In spring it becomes too hot for them there, and they leave for southern Europe where it's warm enough, but not too warm. They need warm temperatures, not freezing temperatures, but not hot temperatures. Now that northern Europe summers are becoming warmer too, more bee eaters are making a beeline for northern countries. As long as they can find enough insects, they are delighted, looking for grasshoppers, bees, and dragonflies. And so the bird watchers are also excited that the bee eaters are showing up every season, every year once. In the same areas, there are also birds that are becoming less common. The icterine warbler, for example, the icterine warbler likes it a bit cooler. It usually doesn't go much further south than Britain or the Alps. Now that it's getting warmer and warmer there, though, fewer of them are spotted in those regions where they used to be in much larger numbers, and they are much more comfortable in Scandinavia and Russia, way up further north. Something similar is happening in North America, and I have somebody buzzing in the apartment. This is the way it works. I create some employment for someone. He's a poor man, Soumyadeep from West Bengal, who needs a job. He's young, but he has to support his family. Okay, so we're talking about the bee eaters and the icterine warbler, and some birds go further north. Now that's getting warmer and warmer there. Few of them are spotted in the warmer regions. They're much more comfortable in Scandinavia and Russia. Something similar is happening in North America with species such as the loons, northern cardinals, and tufted titmice expanding their territory to the north. These are the mobile generalists. They move when they have to. They relocate. But what about the birds who already live way up in the far north? Where are they going to go? Where should they go? Planet Earth stops north of the North Pole. North of the North Pole? Is there north of the North Pole? And that's a pain for the ivory gull. The whitest seagull, in the world likes to hang out around pack ice. Remember, the polar bears also go around on pack ices. They live on fish, shrimp, and polar bears leftover. The polar bear eats, but it's a clumsy eater. It tears into the meat and leaves a lot of things behind. So they are found mainly above the Arctic Ocean and on the edges of Canada, Greenland, and Russia. But the North Pole is warming up. There's less and less pack ice. Scientists have already noticed that the number of ivory gulls is declining rapidly. Unlike the bee eaters and the icterine warblers, they have nowhere else to go. They are going to have to adapt to stay there somehow. In California, Sierra Nevadas, and Coast Range mountains. In California, Sierra Nevadas, and Coast Range mountains, many bird species are already doing just that. Rather than moving north, these adaptable avians birds are nesting 5 to 12 days earlier than they did 100 years ago. So they're just adjusting their life cycle to the climate change. Is it because they prefer to nest when the temperature is just right, or are they hoping the new timings will mean more insects and caterpillars for their chicks? And the chicks are born. The chicks need food. The mothers need to feed them, so they need to be sure that there is enough food. So maybe they are going after the timing of the food and not necessarily just the temperature. Scientists aren't completely sure yet whether it's the food or the temperature, but they're going to keep studying to find out. Okay, so let's look at some of these birds here. Oh, shiny, says the sparrow, and here is a bee catching a bee, and another song. And this is the ivory gull over here going into the next page, and we have the chicks waiting for food, and the mom is saying, do you want another song? They're saying, no, I want food. And here is a mom that's bringing some food for the chicks, and here is the bee eater looking at the mate, and they're saying, when do we meet up earlier in the year to have chicks for food? The great tit is sitting over here, and this is the icterine warbler looking very cute, and you can see the icterine warbler has to feed the chicks that are hungry when they are born, and they need a lot of food just like you did and were crying all the time, and mom had to feed you milk and so on, wake up in the middle of night several times to feed you to make sure you were not hungry and crying, right? So this is tough life for the birds. Okay, so now what about the birds who already live up there? We already said they are going to have to adapt, and in California, Sierra Nevada, and Coast Range mountains, many birds are already doing this. Okay, so we'll come back and talk about the polar bear. Maybe I should just do that, or maybe it'll get too long. So let's talk about the ivory gulls and the polar bear in the next podcast, because well, let me go ahead and read it. I am just trying to decide the timing, kids, for you to not make the podcast too long. So not just the polar bear. What does polar bear poop smell like? Just ask. Oops, somebody eats the polar bear poop, so just ask the Royal and Jess. Their school organized a field trip to the Norwegian island of Spitsbergen, which we talked about before as the vault where the seeds are kept, where the students were now able to do some research into polar bears. The mission: find out if polar bears in the west of the island are different things than the polar bears in the east. That would make sense because there is much less sea ice in the west than in the east. The polar bears absolutely love to hunt for seals on sea ice. Every winter, polar bears have to go fatten themselves up by catching lots and lots of tasty fat seals, but every year they have less time to do this because the winter arrives late and it leaves early, and the pack ice is becoming less. The sea ice comes later and disappears earlier. This causes problems for the polar bears, which is why you often see them looking for food everywhere and looking a bit sorry for themselves in front of the books about climate change. Here is one, and there is the polar bear poop with a flag that Royal and just collected poop from the west and the east of the Spitsbergen to see what they were eating, and then look They took it all apart. They mainly found lots of little seal bones and whiskers, but also moss, grass, and seaweed. And that's strange because polar bears are dedicated carnivores. They only eat meat. If we were to ask them, if you were to ask polar bears for their top 3 favorite foods, they would instantly reply seal, seal, and seal. But hey, polar bears aren't big talkers. They just go hunt seals and eat, and then they want to hibernate away. Royal and Jess also found a clear difference between the western poops and the eastern poops. The western poops contain far more plant remains, so it seems that polar bears who are less able to hunt seals eat more plants, so they have nowhere to go and they are just adapting. They are changing their habits. But you need to eat a lot of moss and seaweed to get your belly as big and round as from eating a seal, and it may not be as nutritious and as fatty and so on, as full of proteins and so on. So is this diet going to be the polar bear's salvation from climate change? That's the question. All the signs certainly say that polar bears are increasingly looking for their food in different places. They steal eggs from the nests, eat berries, hunt reindeers, and rummage around garbages in villages in the Arctic Circle. So if you're putting out the garbage somewhere in the North Pole region, pay careful attention to what's going on around you, and you get lots of warnings to not ever get close to polar bears and seal your garbage cans, and they are polar bear proof and so on and so forth. However, you sometimes hear that things are actually going pretty well for the polar bear. That's because there used to be much more polar bear hunting. Since 1973, this is no longer allowed in many countries. People were allowed to shoot polar bears, but now they are protected species. As a result, polar bear population appears to be growing in some places, but polar bears are hard to count. They are, very reclusive species. There are probably somewhere between 20,000 and 30,000 of them, which may look like a large number, but that's not such a large number. So they are about to die out because of the climate change. But you can bet that life is going to become harder and harder for the polar bear. Like the ivory gull that can't escape further to the north, it's about as far north as it can go. But their favorite living environment is vanishing beneath their paws and beneath their wings. So is their favorite food. Makes you sad, but this is what life is all about. So I will leave it here and we'll come back and read a little bit more about the other animals in the North Pole, like the reindeer and so on and so forth. Okay, as I said, this is what's happening, and it is kind of depressing, but do not get anxious and do not start feeling sad. Just think about what you can do after you learn all about the bad things that are happening because of the climate change that is being caused by us, not only to us but other species who are helpless and just waiting for somebody to save them. Okay, so we'll come back and discuss more animals from the North Pole. Okay.